Hello there! Today is September 25th, 2012. 25 years ago, an event happened that changed my entire life. It was a Saturday, I remember at that time. The year was 1987. I was actually just entering the first grade. And I had been watching a VHS copy, I should say, of Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, and they'd been having this preview for this new TV show, and they were calling it Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I remember exactly how they described it too. They described the captain as being a veteran officer named Jean-Luc Picard, his executive officer, Commander Riker, Lieutenant Commander Data, an android, they said. Geordi, who I recognize from reading Rainbow as being LeVar Burton, a man of unique vision. And Klingon Officer Worf, Security Officer Yar, Ship's Doctor Beverly Crusher, Counselor Troy. It named all the characters. And it was coming on that night. Now, in those days, of course, like most children, I was given a specific time to go to sleep, usually around 8 or 9 o'clock at that time, as I remember. But in my family, we used to have what were called exceptions, which meant I could stay up, essentially, later than normal, which was, in fact, an exception. And that night, I was granted an exception to see this Star Trek: The Next Generation show called Encounter at Farpoint. And what I saw for the next 2 hours, had commercials in it, that time, was this amazing show about this huge starship and this entity that could essentially control time and space, who called himself Q, who was putting the crew of the Enterprise on trial for the crimes of humanity. And through this mission at Farpoint Station, they had to prove humanity had changed and evolved and had become morally civilized. What happened station, if you haven't seen the show, was that there were these local population who had built a starbase using supposedly geothermal energy. What actually had happened, and this was discovered thanks to Geordi and Counselor Troy, there was this enormous spacefaring life form that could shapeshift, and they had separated it from its mate in order to create this space station. And in the end, this Q admitted that they had solved the puzzle. And Captain Picard resented the test, and Q said he would come back. And then at the end, there's this huge wide-angle camera shot where Picard goes, "Let's see what's out there." And that was it. From that moment on, I couldn't keep my eyes off this show. And it didn't take me very long to realize, in my teens in fact, that this show, Star Trek: The Next Generation, had shaped a lot of my life. And I realize it more so than ever. I'd always been interested in the original Star Trek beforehand. But and even with the other Star Treks, which I all find something good in, Star Trek: The Next Generation, to me, is something special. We'll start with the cultural influences on my life from Star Trek: The Next Generation, since today is the 25th anniversary. And it doesn't seem so long ago to me. It doesn't seem so long ago at all, and that's the key. Star Trek: The Next Generation helped me, embrace, Shakespeare. You always had Shakespeare thrust upon you like it was a quote. This made it seem extremely appealing. Sherlock Holmes, all the classics, jazz. My father was a tremendous jazz fan, but in the real world that we lived in, jazz seemed unapproachable to a young child, as if it was the music for writers and critics and intellectuals. And Riker, on The Next Generation, loved jazz and played the trombone, and it was something the families would see, because this was essentially a family show, basically. I mean, this Starship Enterprise had families on it, and children, and it could relate to everybody, and it had romance, it had sci-fi action, but the one thing that made it important to me, that it had a moral derivative without being dogmatic. And what that means is that, I grew up in an area where there were a lot of people who went to church, and they all basically got their sense of morality from the Ten Commandments, which was fine, really. I'm not discriminating against that. But they also got a lot of other things. They were told that religious people have the right to interfere with what a woman did with her bodies in terms of abortion. They were told that gay people should be put to death, sometimes in Leviticus. And I could not stand this sort of dogma. It seemed that, well, we'll give you moral guidance, but we'll also encourage you to hate the same things we do, and to recruit others to do the same thing. Star Trek didn't do that. It didn't give you a dogmatic point of view of morality. It just gave you morality. The idea of the Prime Directive, non-interference, it gave you the idea that you needed to stand up for what's right without putting yourself directly in the line of fire in terms of interfering. And that was an important lesson for me to learn. And within the Star Trek world, they pointed that out in various different ways. As I grew up and as the show continued, I was the victim of a lot of bullying, which you know, and I saw it happen around me, and I wanted it to stop. And I saw people around me who thought it was a rite of passage, and there were a lot of very questionable things. There was a war in the Persian Gulf in 1991 when Star Trek The Next Generation was still on the air, of which I did not approve. I still don't. I think we were fighting for the wrong thing. And, you know, Star Trek often made an anti-war position, but, you know, society at large, you know, went with it, the yellow ribbons, the patriotism. I was not towing that line. I felt there were other ways, and Star Trek really helped me to do that. So in terms of being interested in Star Trek The Next Generation, it wasn't just me going to Star Trek conventions wearing costumes and outfits and making odd signs or whatever. It was something, probably the closest thing in my life to spiritual as I can imagine, but without worshipping anybody. I never worshipped Captain Picard or Vulcans or, Borg or whoever. I never worshipped any of the Star Trek characters, but they were important key points in my life. And to me, that's what Star Trek The Next Generation will always represent, to me and I'm sure many other people out there. A moral center without the dogma. Happy 25th anniversary, Star Trek The Next Generation. I hope that you continue to inspire as well as entertain as many people as you possibly can out there, and inspire more similar ideas in the future to come, because we're always going to need that. Morality without dogma. See you next time.